Dan, that was a very sobering presentation, which really begs the question, how do we fix this mess? How do we build a sustainable Long Island, given where we are now?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's really the important question, right? It's great to identify problems, but the most important thing is how do we fix them? And I think the good news about that is that despite the magnitude of the problems and the breadth of the problems and the seriousness of the problems, they're all caused by us. And so, as I mentioned, it's not a naturally occurring phenomena. It's the decisions that we're making in our town halls and village halls and at the county that's determining our fate. So if we make better decisions, we'll see meaningful change. So I think the first thing we need to do is to recognize that water quality is really just a symptom of a broader set of underlying problems. And if we want to see improvement in water quality, then we need better land use practices and we need a more effective regulatory process. And again, we can't continue to go on with the least restrictive sanitary standards in the country when we also have one of the largest and most dense populations in the country.
It seems like it's just one decision after another that leads to the mess. The road I live on, one gated community after another, and pretty soon there are no more birds, no more wildlife, and the traffic is just, there's really no attention paid to an integrated approach to things.
Right. And it really starts with policy. One of the things we used to measure our economy by, at the turn of the century was the number of horse carriages that were built. Because the more carriages that were built, the more business that was going on, the greater our economy was functioning. And for decades, we've now measured our economy on Long Island by the number of houses that we build. And so I think we have to ask ourselves, to what end? Are we just going to build homes so that we can have jobs building homes, and that's going to be the staple of our environment, regardless of what impact that has on our coastal resources or our drinking water? So I think we need to think long and hard about how we tie a real sustainable economic model to the protection of our natural resources, and honestly, most importantly, the preservation of our quality of life. And I think we can do that. That's all within our control. We have the tools as a part of our zoning and land use controls. We can reform the process. We just need to find the political will to actually do that.
When you look at the Long Island Expressway, I was born on Long Island. The traffic jams would start like exit 30.
Right.
Now they're starting like exit 60 and above.
Right.
Speaking of quality of life, this is completely unsustainable what we have here.
Yeah, it's a great point. And one of the things we've learned about traffic over the years is we used to think that if we built more lanes on the expressway, we'd reduce traffic. Well, we've learned that the more you increase capacity, the more you generate traffic, because more capacity allows for more growth. So we know them now that roads like the expressway are actually traffic generators as opposed to something that minimizes traffic. And I think we have to think the same way about our wastewater infrastructure. That just because we increase sewer capacity doesn't mean that we're actually going to reduce pollution. If that increased capacity is tied to increased development density, we're actually going to make the problem worse. It's not a matter of the concentration of the waste coming out of the pipe, what's called end-of-pipe standards. What really matters is the mass loading, the total volume of pollution that's entering into our drinking water or into our surface waters. The more we expand capacity of our sewer infrastructure, the more we allow for these incredibly dense developments, the more we're actually loading nutrients like nitrogen and toxins into our water supply. So we need to recognize that and do a better job of tying these improvements in our wastewater infrastructure to improved and smarter land use policies.
Yeah, you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you're going to have sewering down Main Street, that shouldn't also mean that you get to develop what's left of the open space.
Right, and also I think it's important to recognize from an equity standpoint what's going on. What we've done over the last several decades, and what we're continuing to do quite honestly today, is we allow the development community to get these density windfalls. You can build as much as you want. You don't have to preserve open space as part of it. You don't have to put in the necessary sewer infrastructure as part of it. We'll ask the public to fix those problems. At the same time, we'll ask the public to absorb the quality of life losses that the development patterns are causing. And now increasingly what we're doing is we're asking the public to subsidize through tax abatements and economic development incentives and infrastructure projects the very development patterns that are impacting their quality of life and their water quality. So they're absorbing the cost of a lost quality of life. They're being asked to fund the infrastructure needed to fix the problem, and they're being asked to subsidize the very development practices that are causing the problem. Makes no sense.
How do we wake up the public to the fact that we're driving down the wrong road here?
Sure. Well, that's the important question, and I think we need to look at it many times through advocacy organizations like Peconic, Baykeeper, and many of the other groups that are out here that do an incredibly valuable service to the public in trying to educate the public about these issues and fighting individual proposals. I think we also have to recognize that in terms of the outcomes, the end result, all that matters, we've been losing ground. So we've spent $1 billion through the county's 0.25% drinking water protection fund to protect water quality. And despite that $1 billion, water quality has only gotten worse. We've spent on the East End alone another $1 billion through the Community Preservation Fund to protect community character.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, community character has only continued to be impacted by our increased development densities.
Mm-hmm.
So if we've already spent $2 billion just through 2 programs over the last 20-odd years and it hasn't worked, then it's time we start thinking about it differently. And instead of fighting individual projects, a strategy, we call it Baykeeper the whack-a-mole strategy, we need to start thinking about fixing the regulatory process itself. And I think we need to figure out a way where the regulatory process, particularly when it comes to issues like public health and environmental quality, can be more driven by science, numeric, quantifiable standards in terms of nutrients and pollutants, rather than driven by special interest needs in terms of growing the economy or...
Well, I think you could make a strong economic argument that we need to, turn the ship around, because if we don't, the scientists tell us that by 2030 we've lost all our bays,
Right.
all our ponds, all the wildlife, all the reasons that people want to live on Long Island to begin with, and you'll see real estate prices go like that. So either we figure out how to do it sustainably now, or we're all going down with the ship.
That's a great point. That's really the cruel irony of it, is it not only are we losing or being impacted in terms of our public health and lost environmental resources because of these policies, but at the same time, ultimately, it's undermining the economic viability of our island, because our real estate economy, our marine economy, our tourist economy are dependent upon clean water. So we can be short-sighted about it and say, well, almost like a game of musical chairs, let's keep just turning and flipping properties over until the whole system collapses, or we can figure out a way that we can more sustainably not only promote reasonable economic development, but also protect our region in terms of its resources and our public health.
Well, I'd say to the builders here, you can still make money building, just don't build as you have been.
Right.
Because we're in the 21st century now. I mean, it's incredible to me that we have 500,000 cesspools and septic tanks between Nassau and Suffolk. That's we're going back to the Romans here with that. On sand, in what would be the third most densely populated country in the world. It's insane.
Yeah, it's an incredibly important point. You have to put things in context, and when you put the region in context, it's hard to argue that the only problem that we need to find a solution to is how do we grow more. And I think it's also important to point out that, generally speaking, I was in government for 25 years. Most of the developers that I've worked with are reasonable, rational people. They play by the rules. So, not to point fingers, but if we really want to find fault, I think we have to find fault in our regulatory processes and our policy, our government policy, because that's what will drive development practices. It's one thing if all of this was illegal activity, but it's not. It's legal activity based upon bad policy. So we need to fix that first, and then I think we'll see the development community realize that they can make reasonable profits, get good returns, have a sustainable industry without an impact to our environment.